Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is a review of the 2003 horror film House of a Thousand Corpses, Rob Zombie's directorial debut. Now, before I get into my thoughts on this film, I want to give a shout out to Brock for requesting this particular film. I hope you enjoy this review, and thank you for your support. Now, I would not say that this is one hell of a great horror movie, like Toby Hooper said, but it definitely has its moments. House of a Thousand Corpses is one of those movies that I think has potential to be a absolute horror classic, but it just doesn't quite get there because the story isn't coherent enough, it isn't fleshed out enough, and it just does not really live up to its full potential because there's a lot of half-baked ideas in this film. There's a lot of questions that are left unanswered. There's a lot of interesting ideas and concepts that are brought up, but they're not really expanded upon. And that's really frustrating because the film genuinely has some really great moments in it. At the end of the day, I have to admit, I actually liked this movie. I didn't love the film, but I did like it. I thought it was an alright, decent bit of horror and black comedy, but I feel that the film could have been fantastic. It could have been phenomenal if, you know, there was another writer that was brought on board to kind of really add more weight and more gravitas to Rob Zombie's ideas and his themes. Someone with a little more experience when it comes to writing films, and in particular writing horror movies tinged with black comedy. And I feel also if the movie just cut out so much of the unnecessary fat and put in some real muscle, it really could have been something special. The film is directed by Rob Zombie. He also wrote the film. I'm not going to be too hard on him as a writer or director when it comes to this movie because it's his first time out. Later in his career, he has no more excuses. He's had so many chances and opportunities to become better when it comes to his filmmaking and his writing. So it's not one of those things where he deserves any leeway. But when it comes to a first-time writer and director, you know, I gotta give him a little bit of some slack here. And I also give him some praise. I think visually this film is honestly pretty damn cool. It's actually a pretty slick and awesome looking movie despite its gritty and dark nature. I love the way that it's lit, especially sequences in the first like 10 minutes or so during the murder ride, for instance. I love the way that scene is lit. I think it is just a work of art in its own right with the use of blues and greens and reds. It's a really impressive looking series of shots from a visual perspective. There's plenty of other sequences that have the right amount of visceralness and the right amount of brutality to really make you cringe, but in the way that actually is effective, not in the way, you know, where you're cringing at how bad it is. And I feel that his sensibilities as a writer in this film, there actually are some funny moments. There's actually some lines of dialogue that are actually pretty hilarious, and some situations and moments that are clever and witty. And the trailer trash dialogue, it's still present in this film, but it definitely feels like it's a little bit toned down compared to how it would be in later films in his filmography. But yeah, from a directorial standpoint, other than some of the shots that really don't make any sense, that are just there for the sake of being what the fuck, I think the direction is actually really a true highlight of this film. The corridor of corpses that lead to Dr. Satan's hideout, or are a part of his hideout, is just really something that is straight out of your nightmares. There's a lot of other, sequences in this film that are just really well shot from a directorial standpoint. There's some really tense moments too, like when Otis and Tiny are hiding as scarecrows, and they come off the posts and just start beating the crap out of people. Like that was a really intense and powerful and effective sequence. It really grabs you by the throat. So there's a lot of moments like that in this film that really are quite powerful and do pack a genuine punch. And a good reason for that is Rob Zombie's dynamic direction. I gotta give him credit for that. His script, though, it's very hit and miss. There are some lines of dialogue that are funny because of just how absurd and insane they are, like Dr. Zayas up somebody's asshole, and just the banter with Sid Haig's character, and some of the other exchanges between the Firefly family and other people, in the cast. A lot of the stuff with the character, I think it's Jerry. Yeah, Chris Hardwick. I knew I recognized that guy. Yeah, Chris Hardwick, who plays Jerry in the film. I thought he was a lot of fun. I really liked that character. He was the comic relief that actually was funny. He had charisma. He had personality. I enjoyed watching him on the screen. I enjoyed his interactions with other people. Rainn Wilson is also in this in one of his earlier roles, and he's also a good amount of fun as essentially the straight guy to Chris Hardwick's zany, off the wall Jerry, who's all about pranks and jokes and stuff. And he's the guy who's more laid back. Not necessarily laid back, but he's the guy who's more out there and outgoing. And Rainn Wilson is the guy who's more laid back and keeps to himself. But yeah, I really liked the dynamic between him and Rainn Wilson's character Bill. And the few scenes you see with Stuckey, who's played by Michael J. Pollard, him and Sid Haig. I liked the witty retorts between those two as well. And like I said, there are some lines of dialogue that are genuinely witty. Then there's other ones that really don't land. But that's how it is with a lot of comedies. And when it comes to the horror, there are some moments that, like I said, are really genuinely gruesome. That really do get under your skin. But then there's other moments with the horror that are just confusing and don't make any sense. Feel like they're way too drawn out, or not stretched out enough in terms of like revealing what is actually going on with these characters. It's not necessarily something that is lacking in terms of the motivation of this family. It's fine that they're just a bunch of thrill killers. But when you bring up someone like Dr. Satan and you show this really just crazy, insane set piece with Dr. Satan with like an oxygen mask, and he's like this old decrepit walking corpse with like mechanical arms and shit, you want to know why. You want to know what's going on with that. You want to know more. You want to get to see more of this Dr. Satan. You want to is he a corpse? Is he not? What is the story behind Dr. Satan? You want more of this Dr. Satan stuff, and it doesn't really explain or really provide a lot of meat on the bone when it comes to that character and that subplot. So it just seems like it's just randomly thrown in there just to kind of tie some of the more loose ends or some of the other, aspects of the film into the rest of the narrative. This film, in a lot of ways, plays out like a show reel for visual effects, for practical makeup, and performances by certain actors and actresses, and, ideas and concepts and themes. Some of it's very similar in terms of the ideas or the concepts to something like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, for instance. But I didn't feel like it felt like it was just a straight-up rip-off of those kind of films, though. I felt like there was enough here that it felt like it was kind of its own animal. The kind of added touch, not the kind of, the added touch of Otis being some kind of demented taxidermist was a really nice touch, really creative, and really just disturbing. The fish boy is a really disturbing sight, but it's a really effective sight in terms of horror. And so are the other moments in the film, like in Dr. Satan's lair, with, like I said, with the corridor of corpses, Dr. Satan himself, this hulking brute mutant thing, who like pukes or like excretes mucus out of his mouth and has like red skin. It's a really cool looking effect. There's a lot of moments in this movie where there's some really cool looking effects, some really cool ideas. It doesn't all gel into the most satisfying whole because of all these really ineffective, distracting transitions and edits. I mean, there's a scene where the film literally stops to show this African-American guy saying, "We are in hell! You're in hell! Hell is on earth!" or whatever the fuck. And you're just like, what does this have to do with anything? It doesn't have to do with the film in any way whatsoever. It's just a random what the fuck moment. And there's a lot of those in this film. And this film really could have been all killer and no filler. And if it was something like that, then maybe I could deal with the lack of the most cohesive narrative. Maybe I could deal with the fact that we don't really get that much backstory on Dr. Satan, especially in terms of like how he wound up at this point with being like this half man, half machine monster. We don't know any of that. And maybe I could deal with that more if it was all killer and no filler. But there's a lot of filler in this film. A lot of shots that just don't add up to anything and are just the epitome of like a filmmaker just experimenting, just tinkering around with things. The movie in a lot of ways feels like something you would see late at night on television when you're flipping through channels and you just catch portions of it and you would be like, what the fuck is this? And I think that might have been what Rob Zombie was going for with this film. I mean, in the beginning of it, you have this like horror host who's introducing the movie, and then you get the stuff with Sid Haig and his character and his shop and his murder ride. And then he tells the people about Dr. Satan and the legend and gives them a map to send them on their way. They then wind up running into the Firefly family, and their night of terror truly begins. And you find out along the way that Dr. Satan actually is real, and it's not just a legend. But it's just one of those things that you have like the basis. You have like the basic nuts and bolts for a good story, but you don't have, the most important parts of it. You don't have the foundation. You don't have like the right pieces. You don't have like the frame. You don't have the right framing for it. And it, as a result, it just is not a very good film when it comes to its narrative, when it comes to its story. But the characters are decent enough. I mean, the villains are, effectively villainous and despicable, especially Otis, played by Bill Moseley. I knew I recognized him. I was like, is that Chop Top? Or like, it is Chop Top. I was like, I knew that was somebody that I recognized. And to be honest, Bill Moseley's performance in this is essentially just kind of doing Chop Top. Maybe kind of, he's easing it back a little bit. He's not really as over the top, but it's very similar in terms of the way that he carries himself, and even when it comes to the appearance of the character. But it's always great to see Bill Moseley, working in his wheelhouse. And Sid Haig, he turns out to be not really the most trustworthy guy, but you kind of got that vibe anyway. But despite that, you couldn't take your eyes off him. May he rest in peace. I think this is a really good role for him, and I can see why a lot of people really have a lot of affinity for Captain Spaulding, because it's just a really, fun, no frills, no bullshit kind of performance. Karen Black, she's also in this as Mother Firefly. Good casting, gets the job done. And you also have like Walton Goggins, who plays a police officer, Tom Towles, who plays a sheriff named Sheriff Wydell. And you have Sheri Moon Zombie as Baby. And I'm not really going to get a pile on Sheri Moon that much, because with this particular character, the character is supposed to be nails on the chalkboard, irritating. That's the intention for this character, to be this hyper and this childlike. So that's the whole point of the character. So she does a good job when it comes to what she has to work with, but I still could not stand that character. That character was so annoying. It was irritating, and the only time I didn't mind that character is when she was just lip syncing Betty Boop in one sequence. Other than that, it was just too much for me. Thankfully, she wasn't in the film as much as someone like Bill Moseley. I would have liked to have seen more about Matthew McGrory's character, Tiny. I really would have liked to have seen more with that character. A little bit more backstory, a little bit more information about him. Really great looking makeup, and I think he actually is. I think the actor who plays Tiny actually does have some sort of, he did have some sort of condition. Good for him for getting a role and, getting the chance to, make his disability work for him, and, make a little money on, as well. And trying to think of anyone else. Like, you have these other girls, like Erin Daniels, who plays Denise Willis, Jennifer Jostyn, who plays Mary Knowles. And the reason why I'm bringing up all these cast members right now instead of waiting until later is because it all ties it together into the story when it comes to the characters. I always talk about how characters are really important to a good film. And I feel, despite the fact that the narrative is not as cohesive as it could be, the characters are pretty strong. There really weren't any other any characters that I really loathed other than Baby, because the main cast of the group of travelers who wind up in the sights of the Firefly family, I liked pretty much all of them. I thought they did their jobs fairly well. In particular, I liked Jerry and Bill the most, but the other girls did a good job. And the Firefly family was compelling and pretty memorable in its own right. And the screenplay also had other moments that just were really unsettling, like the sequence when Otis, for the Halloween party, with the costume party, he skins one of the girl's father's face off and his chest, wears her father's chest and his face, and is like, give your father a kiss. It's like a really unsettling and creepy scene, and it's incredibly ballsy and disturbing in terms of its subject matter. And the fact that the film goes there really does make the movie stand out from other films, at least in this particular time period in the early 2000s. Because there was a lot of early 2000s horror films that were just trying to be the next Ring, or, PG-13, and didn't really want to go that far. So it was refreshing to see something like House of the Thousand Corpses back then, and in some ways it still is now. But even though it was a really disturbing moment, it was handled in a way where it never went too far. It showed you enough to really put you on edge and make you uneasy and make you a little queasy, but it didn't go to the extreme length of him like fucking her with her father's face on. It didn't go that far, and I think that's something that Rob Zombie should have done more of later in his career, because it seemed like as he got farther along in his filmography, he just decided to throw that subtlety out the window, and as a result, he made those sequences with those kind of concepts so much less unsettling and actually more laughable because of how overly intense they were. And I can't be the only one, but I definitely got some Michael Myers vibes from that father mask too. And I think that might have been intentional in some way, or might have been an unintentional thing, because the actor's face looked very similar to William Shatner, the William Shatner mask for Halloween. But yeah, I really thought the film had some really effective nightmarish imagery. Some good performances by pretty much the entire cast, and the score by Rob Zombie and Scott Humphrey, it has its moments. I think it works all right, but it's not particularly that memorable. Would have liked to have heard more of Rob Zombie's songs in the soundtrack. Would have helped the film a little bit more in terms of the sonic power of it. But it's decent enough. The cinematography by Alex Pappas and Tom Richmond, it's hit and miss. There are some moments where it looks absolutely stunning because of the use of lighting and shadow and how the production and art design, which is absolutely phenomenal, by the way. I want to give the production designer and the art director the utmost credit for this movie. I just is a really great looking movie from that perspective. From the Firefly house to the murder ride to Captain Spaulding's place, like everything when it comes to the production design and art direction in this movie is fantastic. And it's a movie that, from a cinematography perspective, has the right amount of grime and the right amount of grit. It doesn't get too grimy, but there are some moments where, because of the way that it decides to like mess around with the lighting, or show these really grainy home videos, at times it just doesn't feel very... It doesn't feel nearly as immersive as it did when it wasn't going that route, when it wasn't trying to be all fancy with its edits. It's one of those movies where I think it's actually more effective when you don't have those things. There are some moments where the grainy footage actually does work, like some of the gore scenes, like when I think it was Rainn Wilson's character, when he gets his hand cut off. But there's other moments where it just isn't really as effective and falls flat, and there are certain scenes with the way that it's edited that give away things, like Baby being, a sadistic killer. They just give it away like way early, So then there's no, so when it's this whole, when you have this whole sequence of events where it's all like, oh, can we trust her or not? And the group of travelers are spending some time at the Firefly house, and it's this whole sort of thing of like, is she gonna do something? It's given away in these edits that just show that she's some crazy psycho bitch. So I think that that really wasn't that well put together. But that doesn't necessarily have to do with cinematography, but some of it does with, you know, the gritty, you know, the more grainy sort of cinematography. But the editing by Catherine Himoff, Robert K. Lambert, and Sean K. Lambert, that is honestly one of the weakest parts of the film. There are certain moments in this movie, like in the shootout in the beginning, like the stick-up scene at Captain Spaulding's place. Like, there's like a shot where there's like a quick cut like 3 times in succession that is just complete overkill. Not needed. So there's a lot of moments like this in the film where, you know, there's slow-mo that isn't really necessary, doesn't add anything to the mood or the atmosphere, doesn't really enhance the sequence that it's in. There's a scene like when Otis is about to shoot while Goggins, his character, in the head, and it just pauses for this uncomfortable long time on this establishing shot, essentially, like this really, you know, far away pan that's looking down, and you're waiting for him to pull the trigger, and it's just static. There's nothing happening for what feels like forever until he finally pulls the trigger. Not needed. That's some art house shit that could have been trimmed down considerably. So there's moments like that in the film where you have this art house kind of approach, trying to be experimental with the editing and the way that the film looks, and sometimes it works, but sometimes it doesn't. And that's honestly kind of the good way to sum up House of a Thousand Corpses. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. That's really a good way to sum up the movie. It has like a running time of 89 minutes, and to be honest, I really wasn't that bored throughout it because there were some visuals that at least were interesting, or, you know, some gore, or, you know, a moment where I kind of chuckled, or, you know, there was some twist or something in the story that kind of caught my interest. So it wasn't really a film that I thought was that boring. I didn't think it was that hard to sit through when it comes to how it was paced. The moments where it just lost me were the random what the fuck scenes. But there weren't so many of them in succession, or an overabundance of them to the point where I just couldn't get into the film at all. They were just random moments that just popped up, and I was just like, why? And they just kind of momentarily drug the film to a little bit of a stop, you know, dragged it a little bit to a halt, but never really to a full stop. So it just slowed it down a little bit for me, and then, you know, it kept going. So it was one of those kind of cinematic experiences. So yeah, I mean, I would say as of right now, this is my favorite Rob Zombie movie, but it's not one of my favorite films. There were some things about it that I really loved: the Corridor of Corpses, the production and art design, the stuff with Captain Spaulding and Sid Haig, the makeup effects, the look of Dr. Satan at the end and his hulking minion. Yeah, there's some, you know, yeah, there's some stuff I really like about the movie, but then there's other things that I'm just very indifferent on, and or don't care for at all, like just the random what the fuck moments and the weird transitions, and, you know, the fact that it's not as cohesive of a narrative as it could be. But yeah, I don't really know what else to say about House of a Thousand Corpses, except thanks for watching my review, and as always, I'll see you later. See ya.